All right, hi everyone, I'm Anastasia Kouvaras Ostrowski. I'm an assistant professor here at Purdue, and I'm going to be talking today about supporting responsible design and implementation processes of robots and AI. So in my work, I engage a lot with designers, users, stakeholders, and policy thinkers around robot and AI technology, thinking through the lens of equitable design or responsible design. So that can mean things like transparency, privacy, ethics, all of those different human-centered attributes. I wanted to kind of set the stage for what I'm going to be talking about today, which is working with industry members around designing AI. And so, as you may know, there's a lot of emphasis and push now to really be speeding up AI automation. And so I have people coming to me being like, hey, I need AI now, but they don't know exactly what they need the AI for at the same time. We also know that there's a lot of importance around trust, just like Ting was saying, and also all these human factors, thinking about how we're going to interact with these agents. And so the question that I've been exploring is, how do we design robots and AI technologies considering employee perceptions, interactions, and ethical considerations? And so I'm going to share a study that I've run before around autonomous agent design workshops in industry, specifically thinking about how do we empower employees who have this great contextual knowledge to design the roles of autonomous agents in contexts such as risk management, safety, robot integration. And so in this study, we are working with designers, engineers, people from the legal team, people from the privacy team at a company to really bring these different ideas together. So I'm just going to walk through how this study was run. So we did a workshop, a 3-series workshop, the first one focusing on designing personalities and roles of agents, the perceived personalities and roles, I should say. The second workshop was around policies. And then the last workshop was around how do you integrate them into a risk management process, and where do these agents belong? I'm going to focus first just talking about personalities and roles. So in this workshop, we specifically started with problem scoping around a risk management context. This was confined space entry, which is quite a dangerous area for many different companies. We then did a storyboarding activity, which is basically creating a cartoon of the interaction that you see with these agents. And then we looked at personality design. And so this, just to make it a little bit bigger for you, is the Big 5 personality matrix just mapped out into this shape. And each of the colored line represents a different dimension of the Big 5 personality model. This is a very common framework that's used in human-computer interaction and human-robot interaction research fields. So after they designed all these different elements, they then shared these out with the group, really giving their justification and reasoning behind their designs. So in total, we worked with 28 participants, and we ran this 3 different times. We did a series of workshops with robots, one on chatbots, and then one on drones to look at different types of autonomous agents. And so first, I'm going to dive into looking at what do these human agent work structures look like. And I like to give you a taste of the data. This is my favorite storyboard. This is about Bob, who is a worker who's going to a confined space entry. He has a robot canary, kind of being a metaphor for the canaries that used to be used in mines. And so they're entering a space together, and the robot is super helpful. It's shining light for the person. They're going to this space, and the robot says, oh, be careful. Even because it notices that Bob's blood sugar is low, it gives him a sandwich. How kind is that? And then you get to the point where the canary says, oh, Bob, don't come down here. There's something nasty here, and there's an accident. So the robot puts on his little cape and says, oh, Bob, you never listen. I'll save you. And so you can see that the relationship that is being designed in here is like a work friend or a teammate, something that looks like this. In other storyboards, we saw very different relationships, though. We saw ones that may look like this, where the agent's completely autonomous, there's no human involved. And we also saw ones like this, which were really interesting, where there used to be a direct link between maybe a manager and their employees, but now there's an agent kind of interjecting into that space. And then when we look at it deeper into kind of trying to understand the autonomy that's kind of developed into these relationships, we can see there's sort of 5 different categories. You have completely autonomous, you have only autonomous during an emergency, you have this hybrid autonomy based on very specific situations, you have a handoff of tasks, and then you have this really joint teamwork collaboration. And we look across the different agents, different embodiments are kind of showing that maybe different levels of autonomy may be preferred by the employees who are going to be interacting with these technologies. And then I said I'd talk about personality, so I'm going to bring this up real quick. I could be surprising or not surprising, but even though embodiment is kind of influencing autonomy, the embodiment doesn't really quite matter with personality. And of course, this is a very limited case, I will say, but we were surprised to see that there were dimensions that really fit well for an agent. Things like you want your agent to be organized and careful. You want it to be maybe trusting and helpful. You want it to be calm, and you also want to be very practical. And this makes sense for risk management cases. I don't think you'd want a very anxious agent in the case of an emergency. So this is quite fascinating, and I will say this is kind of going to line with different theories in human-robot interaction, human-computer interaction, but I'm also doing some future work, and we're really looking at understanding, like, does it make sense to be using this as a personality when for risk management contexts and other contexts in industry, we don't want some of these personality matrix, we may not need these perceptions for those tasks. The other thing I just want to touch on real quick is also around policy design and analysis. So after we're designing these agents, we bring up policy because it's very critical, because when you're bringing these systems in, they're not going to be isolated in most cases. So they're going to have ramifications in companies, in different institutional settings. And so when we have people design personalities, we see them kind of anchoring into these policies. We see them anchoring into these three different areas. One around data privacy, right? How secure is this data? Where is it being collected? What type of data is being collected? How is it being stored? We see policies around ownership. Who owns these systems? Who is owning the interaction and the responsibility within that? We had conversations yesterday around accountability, and accountability comes up into these cases asking, if something goes wrong with the agent and I'm working with it, am I the one responsible? Is the agent responsible? And also thinking about things like liability around that. We also think about users' rights. With these agents, there's a high risk of surveillance in the workplace. We already have some technologies that allow this with agents that are collecting so much data, such as knowing a worker's blood sugar levels, as was in that one story. What rights do people have over their data when we think about things like their insurance and also different other rights in the workplace? So just some things to take away from this study that I wanted to share. So this is actually the first work that's revealing power dynamics and human-agent interaction designs when we're doing this work with employees in industry contexts. And it's a bigger call on really promoting design tools as a method to identify human-machine interaction hierarchies and collaboration strategies for autonomous agents. It also is revealing core policy areas that need to be considered within the engineering design process. If we know there is a concern later on, we can build in different design features early on to really think about this in a long-term process. And so I'm going to leave you with this thought here, which is to successfully and responsibly design and implement human AI technologies, we need to collaborate with users through participatory approaches and really get people into the process because they have that lived experiential knowledge that is so critical in designing these systems. And it can really help us also expand across into different areas as well. This is just acknowledging some of the funders of this work. I will continue to leave this here if anyone has any questions.
Oh, there's a mic here. Sorry. Just wanted to make you walk. So my question is actually kind of for the three of you almost. So implicit in the way you're talking about human AI collaboration, there's a notion that you can come up with a right design, whether that's learning it from the users or whether thinking about how you design it. But we've also been talking a lot about how much this technology is changing so quickly and capabilities will affect the right version of it. And so we had a question at the last break, which was, how do you design for evolvability when you're evolving on so many dimensions? And I'm just curious what you think about that, because you can't kind of redo this type of a study every time the technology changes. So how do we manage that?
Yeah, and I think some of these factors, it may not have to come down to like the very minute design feature. Like for example, you're designing for transparency, right? If the notion is the robot should be explaining what it's doing, that, regardless of the task, is a still core that needs to be held true. And so I think part of the question, I guess I would rephrase, is what are the core aspects that we can identify that kind of will become maybe these new features around AI that are then being able to be put into multiple different systems. And then it's not, I think there's a mixture of contextual as well as sort of this, kind of we should have it in everything. And I think a lot of things around, transparency, privacy, those type of things, having these principles can help guide and kind of move with that evolution.
Yeah, to add to that point, so I think policy-wise, it might be a little more difficult. But in terms of, what I do and looking at decision-making patterns and things like that, I do think there's a lot you can do. So even in business world, they model human decision-making processes and teamwork and things like that. So I do think you can quantify and predict those things, even though, every scenario would look a little different. I think you can put in different, variables into the model so that it can adapt to different situations. So I do think there is a way to create more generalizable model of decision making in these contexts.
So when I presented my research question, I put parentheses around the word new. So I'm not sure at this point, but I'm hoping that we will converge to a set of formulas, mathematical formula or mental models that kind of present some consensus about reactions and trusting AI. Also, at the end of my presentation, I think all the work that I have done can lead to personalized calibration of trust. So every single person is different and every system is different. With this moving target, I think personalization may be the direction to go.
So I had a question around, because there's been a lot of talk about trust, and these have all viewed trust in like a positive way. How do you get the person to trust the AI or the agent? But the talk this morning mentioned radiologists not trusting themselves anymore. So I'm curious if you look at all about the negative implications of that. So like how AI or an agent can impact you to no longer trust yourself when you really should be.
Yeah, no, I can take a stab at that. I feel like I'm a hearty believer in distrusting systems. And so one of the projects that I'm currently working on is looking at when you have these robot implementations or AI system implementations, how do you design against complacency? And that is, I think, somewhat related to this trust aspect, because they become so inherently trustful of it that they don't think to question anything, and or they build in patterns that actually end up hurting themselves. So for example, this is definitely more embodied, but there's these autonomous vehicles that operate in different manufacturing places, and I recently heard of a study where they were interacting with these systems long term, and the operators who were like doing a task with the robot got so used to the robot that they would kind of just dive in front of it, and would lead to these different risky situations that could have been leading into a fatality. And they would say, but I made eye contact with it, or like, oh, I can usually just reach in and do that. So they got so used to their perception of the system that it ended up causing all of these risks and harms. So I do think there's a cool space for like disruptive design where you purposely put in a failure of some sorts, so it reduces the full trust and kind of helps people question a little bit and think critically about it, and at the same time reduces the complacency, especially in very risky situations. But I think it applies over to even just using AI chatbots like on our computers.
Yeah, no, I think you kind of answered my question. My question was how does embodiment play a role in the trust? And I think you kind of touched on that issue.
Yes, I am not an expert on trust, but there is a whole field of in human-robot interaction, human-computer interaction, where they basically just look at, if I change the embodiment, how is it changing trust? How is it changing what people perceive competency of? And we were seeing that a little bit in our workshops, just by asking people to design the autonomous agents and what types of autonomy they think these agents should and could have. And it makes sense, right? Because if you add different functionalities, people may want to use it in different ways more, especially with a robot that, people say, it has arms, it's going to save me. People may think, I want that to work autonomously because it's going to pick me up versus the chatbot can't. So yeah, it definitely is very intertwined.
Thank you.